This was originally supposed to be a scene discussion of the very famous hand clasping scene that we see in all of the trailers and in a lot of the fan videos, as I've watched it many times. It then made me think, not for the first time, about why this show not only has been so popular, but why do I like it? I feel like I'm quite jaded by the romance genre these days, and that there are a lot of shows out there that don't really grab me, even though technically, as I've been a romance fan for such a long time, I really should be in the target demographic. Most of the emphasis on this show when people are recommending it to other people appears to be on the enemies to lovers trope. So recommendations which come up tend to be Hermione, which is a popular non-canon pairing in the Harry Potter fandom of Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger. I have never been a fan of the Draco Malfoy and Hermione pairing simply because I didn't like the character of Draco Malfoy. A lot of people mistake enemies to lovers as being any two enemies can get together. For me, some people who are initially crappy human beings actually are crappy human beings. In fiction, we tend to have a lot more tolerance for somebody if they're good looking. So Malfoy was always described as being very beautiful and golden haired and all that sort of stuff. If he was physically unattractive and misshapen, I doubt anybody would probably want a redemption arc for him. So I personally never shipped the two of them. My non-canon pairing for Harry Potter was Cedric and Hermione. That's not to say I don't like the enemies to lovers trope, but typically when I like it, it is two people that don't like each other, but they're separately actually good people, but they stand for very different things philosophically, or there is a misunderstanding, or they're on opposite sides of a conflict. I tend to not like someone who's just toxic and nasty, but just because they're good looking, I'm willing to be more invested in their redemption arc. You see this a lot in television shows and in movies, where somebody who is introduced as a villain sometimes receives an extremely sympathetic response from the audience simply because they are considered to be physically attractive and therefore more worthy of redemption. Whereas if exactly the same character was played by someone who wasn't attractive, I doubt there would be as many shippers and I doubt that there would be as many people who want to see them redeemed. It's probably the reason why, in many of these cases, this previous villain is sometimes softened and diluted down to being an anti hero, and then eventually, sometimes, even a hero. For those who don't only consume Western media, I've also seen Meteor Garden recommended, and that was a very popular Taiwanese drama that was based on a Japanese series. That is a very, very close approximation because that does have many of the elements of Maxton Hall in the sense that there's an exclusive school, it's enemies to lovers, it's rich boy bully, poor scholarship girl from an underprivileged family who's sweet and lovely. It's the rich boy's pride putting something in the way of their love, but ultimately he falls pretty hard and he does love her despite all of the adversity. There's also familial objection to the lowness of her station compared to the stature of their family, and there's usually moments of tenderness. So there's usually some sort of vulnerability of the female character, which means that the male has to be protective or jealous. And similarly, there's usually a moment of vulnerability where the female character is able to sort of demonstrate some sort of protective instinct over the male. But as I thought about it more and more, the reason that it's so popular is that it actually has a lot more in common with very chaste stories like Pride and Prejudice and North and South than it does with a lot of the teen dramas and romances that we've seen. Because in those historic stories that you see from Jane Austen Catherine Gaskell or Georgette Heyer, for instance, those Regency, like those historical Regency romances, they are very chaste, and all of the sexual tension and anticipation is because there's not a lot of overt sexuality. It's all reliant on extremely long and lingering glances and occasional brushes of the hand and overhearing what one another say. So it's very, very subtle romance. And then by the time you get to the ultimate romantic climax, it's usually just an extremely passionate declaration of love and a kiss. You normally won't get sex. Maxton Hall is different. It's from modern sensibilities, so we do get sex. But even then, it's very tastefully done. It's very subtle. But the build up is there. It's got exactly the same sort of gradual lead up with very, very long glances, brushes of the hand, crooked smiles, shared understanding, and even the delightful dance sequence that we see in episode 3. The first one is very playful, and then the second one, even though it's a slow dance and a little bit more sexually charged, it's still very chaste because it doesn't even end in a kiss. So I thought it might be fun to explore the similarities. And why surprisingly, I actually think that I feel like the key element of Maxton Hall that appealed to me is probably more closely related to Jane Austen's novel Persuasion rather than Pride and Prejudice. There are far more elements in common with Pride and Prejudice in terms of the plot points, but in terms of the heart of the story that really resonated with so many people, I actually think that it is something that is from Persuasion.
Your sisters are engaged at present. You know perfectly well it would be a punishment to me to stand up with any other woman in the room.
Good God, Darcy, I wouldn't be as fastidious as you are for a kingdom. Upon my honor. I never met so many pleasant girls in my life. Several of them uncommonly pretty. Eh?
You have been dancing with the only handsome girl in the room.
Darcy, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. Look. There's one of her sisters. She's very pretty too. I dare say, very agreeable.
She is tolerable, I suppose. But she's not handsome enough to tempt me. Bingley, I'm in no humour to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. Go back to your partner, enjoy her smiles. You're wasting your time with me. In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. In declaring myself thus, I am fully aware that I will be going expressly against the wishes of my family, my friends, and I hardly need add my own better judgment. The relative situation of our families is such that any alliance between us must be regarded as a highly reprehensible connection. Indeed, as a rational man, I cannot but regard it as such myself, but it cannot be helped. Almost from the earliest moments of our acquaintance, I have come to feel for you a passionate admiration and regard, which, despite all my struggles, has overcome every rational objection, and I beg you most fervently to relieve my suffering and consent to be my wife.
Hey, Karen. Karen. I do like Karen.
How dare you!
Anne Shirley, what is the meaning of this?
It was my fault, sir. I was teasing her.
Stand at the blackboard for the rest of the day.
The clips included earlier from Pride and Prejudice and Anne of Green Gables emphasize the elements of antipathy and reluctant affection. The antagonistic exchanges serve two purposes. They allow the characters to learn more about one another, so that as the barriers do come down, they already know one another, although through the lens of antipathy. The battle of wits is designed to heighten sexual tension, but also make the stakes even higher when they do eventually surrender to one another and fall in love. As mentioned, the enemies to lovers, the reluctant unwilling love, and the class tension tropes are the ones that are emphasized when people are talking about this series. Hence, why Pride and Prejudice is, in the first instance, the more relevant comparison. The reason that I have gone to Persuasion is that in the story there is a scene in which Anne Elliot, the main female character, is having a discussion or debate with Captain Harville about whether men or women are more constant in their affections. It is a discussion about who loves more deeply and who loves longer. Anne claims that women have more longevity in their love. Captain Frederick Wentworth, the main male character, who was formerly in a romantic relationship with Anne, is eavesdropping. The eavesdropping trope is another common trope in romantic stories. It is possible that Anne's comments are directed at Captain Wentworth, but I don't think so. Anne seems genuinely caught up in her discussion with Captain Harville. This causes Captain Wentworth to leave Anne a letter in which he declares that his love for her has remained constant over the years. It is a very passionate declaration in which he rejects her assertion that women love more deeply and for longer. The reason I think of Persuasion more than Pride and Prejudice or even North and South when I think of Maxton Hall is that in the two latter stories, the male lead does fall in love first. However, it's very much a reluctant and unwilling love. There is a fairly significant internal battle, and then he admits his love most reluctantly and with a sense of defeat. In contrast, not only does James fall first and fall hard, but there appears to be no doubt in his mind. When he starts to fall in love with Ruby, he's very much all in. He's not ashamed of it. He has no doubts in his head. The obstacles and conflicts are external to him. Internally, he cares about her, and he does not seem to care who knows it. His family know, his friends know. Even when Wren mocks him for chasing escapee partridges around the courtyard for a girl, not only does James not try to deny it or make light of his feelings, he simply tells his friends to help chase down the partridges. Accordingly, I think there's something very romantic about the fact that James has no sense of shame or hesitation about his feelings for Ruby. This letter from Persuasion has become extremely famous in literature, and I believe that it is a far more sincere and passionate declaration of love than the ones that we encounter from, for instance, Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. Captain Wentworth says the following: I can listen no longer in silence. I must speak to you by such means are within my reach. You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope. Tell me not that I am too late, that such precious feelings are gone for ever. I offer myself to you again with a heart even more your own than when you broke it 8.5 years ago. Dare not say that man forgets sooner than woman, that his love has an earlier death. I have loved none but you. Unjust I may have been, weak and resentful I have been, but never inconstant. You alone have brought me to Bath. For you alone I think and plan. Have you not seen this? Can you fail to have understood my wishes? I have not waited even these 10 days, could I have read your feelings, as I think you must have penetrated mine. I can hardly write. I am every instant hearing something which overpowers me. You sink your voice, but I can distinguish the tones of that voice when they would be lost on others. Too good, too excellent creature, you do us justice indeed. You do believe that there is true attachment and constancy among men. Believe it to be most fervent, most undeviating, in F.W. I must go, uncertain of my fate, but I shall return hither, or follow your party as soon as possible. A word, a look will be enough to decide whether I enter your father's house this evening or never.